Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Cuban-born, Vermont-based jazz lover, world music expert, and radio TV host Toni Basanta on Count Basie, Kansas City, and so much more. So he was born in Cuba, he arrived in Vermont in 2006, and has been a DJ host in different radio and TV stations. At this time, you can listen to him at St. Michael's College's WWPV 92.5 FM, The Mic, on Sundays from noon to 3, where he brings new beats to Vermont and his shows, the Cuban Bridge. He has been a lecturer in Cuba, Uruguay, Argentina, New York City, and Vermont. As a producer, he has participated in more than 600 albums, and he loves Count Basie. We get into his Cuba memories, loving Count Basie, the big Count Basie at 90 show in Kansas City on International Jazz Day, and so much more. Enjoy this interview. Thank you so much for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today to talk about Count Basie, the big day in Kansas City, and kind of your memories and your love of Count Basie. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
You bet. So this all began a few days ago with Anita Dixon with UNESCO Creative Cities here in Kansas City. And you're from Cuba originally. You have a very deep affinity for Count Basie. You have your own show. You work in radio and TV. Talk to me a little bit about how you acquired this love of Count Basie.
Well, in Cuba, we did not have many recordings of Count Basie, but mostly the musicians who could travel outside Cuba, and they always brought the information, then we could take that music and play it on the radio. Since I came to live in Vermont in 2006, I have been following Count Basie Orchestra, and I had the pleasure and the honor to see them playing live in Burlington at the Burlington Discovery Jazz Festival in a great show with singer Diane Shore. That band sounded fantastically. The Flint Theater was completely full, and that is a memory that will live with me forever.
So talk to me a little bit about your history in loving jazz overall and getting into radio and TV.
Well, my story about music began in my house with my family, because my family had 9 jukeboxes in the city of Havana. So they had a collection of all kinds of music, all American jazz songs of the day, Frank Sinatra, Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald. My father was a great fan of Nat King Cole. So we were always listening to the 45 RPM. That was my first school of music. And then in the streets with my friend, we began playing rock and roll. And then when I got around, let's say, 19, 20, I began getting into jazz. There was a wonderful cultural house from the Czechoslovakia Republic in Havana that they sold many LPs. So there I began to buy. Every week I bought 1 or 2 LPs. And every time that I had my salary as a professor, I bought 1 or 2 albums. So I began learning a lot about many bands that had featured musicians like Slide Hampton, who was recording with Bagla Saharanik in the Czech Republic. And there was always something about American music. And then, as I said before, with the musician who went abroad and played in festivals, they were always speaking about the Count Basie Orchestra and others. So in 1989, I began working as a music programmer at the Radio Metropolitana in Havana. That was my first initiation as a disc jockey, broadcaster. In the next 5-6 months, after June 1989, I got my opportunity to begin writing scripts and directing shows on the radio. And then that lasted until 2006, when I came to live in Vermont. I was also one of the MCs at the Havana International Jazz Festival, where I knew many musicians coming from all over the world. And later here in Vermont, I have been hosting my radio shows in 3 different stations. And now I am hosting also a television show that I label as Havana Fairfax Connection. I was born in Havana, Cuba, and I live in Fairfax for 7 years. Now I live in Winooski, but the name is still there. We have 172 episodes of music, many of them with jazz and blues and many local bands. And every Tuesday we host a new episode on television. On the radio, my radio show name is the Cuban Bridge. It's on air on Sundays at the St. Michael's College, also in Colchester. I have been hosting that show since February 2010. Before that, I had the pleasure to be at the University of Vermont and also in a local radio in Burlington that is named the Radiator with 100 watts of fury, in which I played a lot of big bands, including, of course, Count Basie Orchestra.
So, coming from Cuba, I've never been there, but all I ever hear is this infectious, this feeling, this cultural pull towards the music. It's just everywhere you go. It's a part of the world. So that has to be a part of you loving Count Basie because it swings so hard. So talk to me a little bit about the growing up in Cuba and this love of jazz that you've accumulated.
Well, in Cuba, jazz was a little bit out of the mainstream until 1980. In 1980, Bobby Carcassés, who is a wonderful musician and a showman in many cabarets and nightclubs, he is the founding member of the Havana International Jazz Festival that now has more than 40 years. And there we could see a lot of musicians, from Dave Valentin, Tania Maria, musician coming from Chile, the Czech Republic, Russia, Sweden, many bands from the U.S., of course. There has always been a kind of restriction because musicians from the U.S. Sometimes are afraid to go to Cuba because they are banned when they come back here. But, I think that everything has been changing recently, and now there are many of them going to Cuba. For instance, a band named 90 Miles has 2 American, 1 Puerto Rican, and the rest are Cuban. That is a wonderful album that I recommend. It is 90 Miles at Cuba Disco in Havana that I regularly play on the radio a lot, and I also host them the sneak peek in my television show. And jazz in Cuba, now in the schools, everybody's playing more jazz. Before that, the musicians didn't have a jazz class, but they began, let's say, when there was no -1 or there were no books, they were using all the studies of the Chinese sound study for the piano. I know about the piano because my ex-wife is a pianist, so I knew many of them. And now most of those musicians are celebrities all over the world. You can find Cubans playing in Paris. You can find them playing all over Europe, the United States. Here we have the great Ignacio Berroa, who is one of the greatest drummers in the history of Cuban music, who played for many years with Dizzy Gillespie, McCoy Tyner, Bobby Hutcherson, and many others. And he is a great academician as well. So I think that jazz in Cuba has a wonderful story. Before 1959, that is the year before the Cuban Revolution, that forbid many forms of music, especially those coming from the United States of America. But the musicians continue playing. I mean, if it was not allowed or it was forbidden, everybody was playing jazz and everybody was listening to music. And then we had many bands coming from the ex-Socialist Republic who played wonderful jazz from Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia. And then was a great meeting with all of them. The Cuban Modern Music Orchestra, that is the cradle of Irakere, where Paquito Rivera, Chucho Valdez, Carlos Averov, Arturo Sandoval also played. Now they have a name for themselves, and they are celebrating five decades with many concerts in the United States of America. So jazz has always been a music, the same as the blues, funky, rock and roll, R&B, and more. They have been loved by the Cubans, so that is no any different. There are many bands playing rock now in Florida. They are playing in Freedom here, and that is always good. And we have many great players in many bands all over the world.
So the Count Basie celebration on International Jazz Day 2025 here in Kansas City will be the largest collection, the biggest celebration in America as a creative city of music here in Kansas City, celebrating 90 years. What does that mean for you to hear and to know that that's going to happen?
Well, I got that information especially sent by Herbie Hancock. I have been a great admirer of Herbie Hancock since I'm listening to music. I had the pleasure to meet him in Cuba when he went there in a festival hosted by a Swiss corporation, and there he went with Dave Valentin, a band of musicians whose name Inside were young musicians from the U.S., and the manager of Tito Puente. And the celebration of Count Basie, I would like to say something very special about the Count Basie Orchestra. Frank Foster, who was a longtime member of the Count Basie Orchestra, he used to be a mentor of many musicians coming from Cuba to the U.S. And when we have many experiences, let's say Buck Clayton, I have been admiring, and I made a list of musicians that I have been following in the history of Count Basie, like Lester Jones, Herschel Tex Even, Billie Holiday, Jimmy Rushing, Freddie Green. The rhythm section of Count Basie is very well known in Cuba and is being studied by many musicians. Harry Sweet Edison, I played and I hosted one show by Harry Marico and the Diva Jazz Orchestra, and they have great fun of Harry Sweet Edison and played his music. Bob Clayton, Since I Fell For You, Al Gray, Helen Humes, Thelma Carpenter, Joe Williams. I have a great album that was sponsored by Clark Terry, in which featured a very young Diane Shure, and Joe Williams is the great guy there. And the importance of Basie's career helped many, many other musicians to flourish. And I think that is also something that has to be taken into consideration. Now, in this celebration of the International Day of Jazz, there is a documentary from the BBC that I had the pleasure to follow. And in the 60s, the Count Basie Orchestra also recorded with Frank Sinatra, Ella Fisher, Chico Farrell, who is a Cuban-American Mexican international, was also an arranger of two important albums by Count Basie, that Basie Meets Bond and Basie's Beatle Back. And then I even read a lot also about an album that is named High Voltage, that fortunately was hosted by German label, because many of the archives of the Count Basie Orchestra were lost in a fire in the Universal Studios. So I hope that can be recovered, with the participation of many persons who can have albums by Count Basie Orchestra.
So why do you think Count has been so relevant for so long? The jazz orchestra still wins Grammys. They're very prevalent. They're traveling all over. They're always putting on shows. Why do you think Count will remain timeless in the world of jazz?
Well, you mean Count Basie? Why will it be? Well, I think that the importance of Count Basie as a musician and the swing of his band that has been really incredible during many years. And, well, not only the Grammys. I don't think that the Grammys can measure the importance of a band, but they have 18 Grammys, and they have had wonderful players in the history. 1 O'Clock Jump. I received a few years ago a collection of music by a Texas university, and they have a lot of recording with the music of the Count Basie Orchestra. I will look in my collection here at home, and I will, begin hosting them again on the radio, but 1 O'Clock Jump is one of them, and they even have a band of students that is named 1 O'Clock Jump. So the importance of Count Basie Orchestra, well, the great swing bands, without any kind of competition or comparison, Earl Hines, Duke Ellington, Fletcher Henderson, Count Basie, and many others, because sometimes due to economical issues and restrictions, the big band have to be reduced to a combo or an 18 band. Basie had to do that too. And the same as Dizzy Gillespie. There are sometimes less places to play with a big band. I think that the Village Vanguard in New York and other clubs have been hosting weekly, residencies for many bands like Arturo Farrell and others. Maurice Scenario, now Jazz at the Lincoln Center with the Marsalis, Winter Marsalis, who have been hosting a lot of music. But the importance of the Count Basie Orchestra is that they were a very specifically band that played in the swing era, but now with Scotty Barnhart as a leader, the band is still playing. And many of the musicians from the Count Basie Orchestra, I have read their names also playing with the Pacific Mambo Orchestra. That is a band that plays dancing music. And there I could find the names of those players. And also a singer named Jamie, I cannot remember now his last name. I have that album cited by the Count Basie Orchestra, and everybody praised that recording. And I personally working as a disc jockey in Boston, New York. One night, after the band that I was working to finished playing, I said, I am going to play now some American hits. And I played You Will Never Find, and that was the Count Basie Orchestra, and the dance floor was completely full of people. That was a wonderful experience that I will never forget. And the musician came and said, Tony, where do you find that album? I said, well, I always bring something to surprise the people. So that was the Count Basie Orchestra in my experience as a disc jockey. And I have played that album many times. I have others with different collections of Count Basie music.
So have you been to Kansas City?
No, but I am thinking of going to Kansas City. I have a great admiration for musicians in Kansas City, especially one wonderful singer whose name is Karen Allison. McClenty Hunter is a tres player. It's a kind of guitar from Cuban music. He studied in Havana, and he created a school in Kansas City. His wife is from Cuba, and they are doing great. And McClenty Hunter is in one of my TV shows with a band that had Victor Goins on saxophone and clarinet. And that was a show recorded in Havana during an edition of the Jazz Festival there. And that is a wonderful thing that I would love to go to Kansas City, of course.
Well, it's been great for you to talk about Count Basie in Kansas City as we get geared up for this big show with the orchestra on International Jazz Day. So, Tony, it's wonderful to talk to you. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for opening up about your world of music and Count, and best of luck with everything. I appreciate your time today.
Of course, and this coming Sunday, in my show, I will remind people again about Kansas City, and I am going to look for those 3 albums that I have with the music of Count Basie.
Sounds wonderful. Tony, thank you, sir. Godspeed. Keep doing the good work in the jazz world.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much to you, too.
Thanks for listening and tuning into another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and minds in Cuba, Vermont, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Tony for his time, energy, and cool. If you want to hear more Neon Jazz interviews, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends. Here, host of KC's Neon Jazz Radio. On International Jazz Day, April 30th, join us at the Music Hall in downtown Kansas City for the event of the year, 90 years of Count Basie Swing. At 7 p.m., the world-famous Count Basie Orchestra takes the stage. From 5 to 7 p.m., it's a VIP reception with jazz legends and honorees. Finally, from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., join the after-party jam session at Lonnie's Reno Club inside the Ambassador Hotel. Tickets are moving fast. Get yours now at kccreativecity.com/Count-Basie. This event is part of International Jazz Day, supported by the UNESCO Creative Cities Network, with Kansas City proudly standing as America's only creative city of music. I'll see you there, Kansas City.